Welcome to Civil War Digital Digest. I'm Will. Well, today we've got a treat for you. We're going to meet a twice published and soon to be 3 times published author. Let me introduce you to Matt Borders. Matt, thanks for being with us.
Will, it's a pleasure to be here on Civil War Digital Digest. You guys do some awesome work, and I've wanted to be with you for quite some time.
We've been trying to do this since before COVID, so that's great. You also are a podcaster with History Things with Pat McGuire, and you guys have a quarterly series that's just a lot of fun to listen to. But today, let's talk about books.
Yes.
Tell me about your book series.
Well, we have 2 books currently in the Faces of series. This is the Faces of Union Soldiers at Antietam, our first book that came out in 2019. And this past spring, our second book, Faces of Union Soldiers at Harper's Ferry and South Mountain.
Okay, well, sounds like a similar concept across 2 different battles. Tell me in a capsule what this is.
Sure. Specifically, these are looking at the Maryland campaign. So we wanted to start with the big show, obviously, Antietam. And what we did was we took 36 images from my co-author's collection. Now, Joe Stahl, he and I are both guides at Antietam National Battlefield for the Private Guide Service, and he's been collecting CDVs, or carte vistas, for years. And his guys are all tied to the Maryland campaign in some way, but he's been looking for a way to use his collection. And so he touched base with me because I know uniforms and material culture better than he did. And so we decided to collaborate on these books.
So when you buy one of these books, you say, I like the Antietam campaign, I'm going to buy this book. What do you find inside it?
Well, we have, again, 36 individuals for the Antietam book, and that's going to lay out who these gentlemen were, what their regiments were doing on the field, give you a map so that you can actually go to where they were at approximately on the field and potentially follow them around. And then it does a deep dive into the gentlemen themselves, a little bit about their life, and then what you're seeing in the CDV. Kind of real detailed description of the uniforms, sometimes even the backdrops and things of that nature.
Okay. Well, Joe comes to you and he says, Matt, I've got all these photos. I want to do something with them. Why the book? Why, for you, why jump into this project?
Well, that's a good question. I'd actually been looking for ways to dive into publishing myself for a while. And so to ease into it with a colleague, with a friend, with somebody who needed some additional help or expertise, it seemed like a good way to get into the publishing field. And so that's one of the reasons why I took on the project. That, and I love the subject matter.
Great. Well, you love it. There's still going to be challenges. As you develop this, what was the biggest challenge you faced?
The biggest challenge was not so much the research, because Joe had done a lot of the preliminaries when he was collecting these images. The more challenging aspect was actually viewing the images, because some of them are bleached out or they've faded, particularly in some of them. And so getting into the details of the images and finding out what's going on in those is one of the challenges. That, and to be perfectly honest, with over 70 images between the maps and the soldiers, finding a publisher was a little bit of a challenge as well.
Fantastic. Well, it seems like you found one because you went back a second time and they took you again.
Correct. History Press, they concentrate on books that have a lot of images. And so once we touched base with them, they were very interested in the Antietam book, and we were very fortunate that they picked up the second one as well. And soon, coming up next fall, our third book, Face of Union Soldiers at Fredericksburg. So moving away from the Maryland campaign.
Well, we asked about the challenge. You've done this twice and now a third time's in publication. What's the most rewarding bit of doing this for you?
Well, I'm a researcher. I love the research, and really diving into the details on these men's lives is the most rewarding aspect for me. The little stories that come out either with the unit histories, many of these histories dating back to the years immediately following the war or the early 20th century. Most of these are out of print by this point, and so finding those documents, digging into the ORs, of course, the official records, and ideally, if we can have some form of communication, say a letter or a conversation from the troops themselves, really getting those personal touches and stories is what I find the most rewarding.
Well, let me ask you this. You're doing this, obviously it helps career as a historian, but as a history buff, why these stories?
Well, again, they're diving into the individuals themselves. You and I know it's all about really trying to get back to the 1860s, back to the mid-19th century, and dive into the mindset and the material culture of these troops. So that's really what I think all readers of these books can get out of it. Okay? Not only are we talking about the ebb and flow of the fight or the movements on the field, but we're getting to the more personal side of things as best we can with the background of these men and what they do after the war. I was very proud about the South Mountain and Harper's Ferry book. We were able to find the final resting places of almost all of them. And of course, we're also getting into, again, those image analysis, really looking at the uniform and talking about where it might have been from, what it means, different materials, things of that nature.
Fantastic. Well, let me ask this. Faces of Union soldiers at Antietam, South Mountain, and Harper's Ferry, and now Fredericksburg. Will we see a Confederate compendium to any of these or in any battles coming up?
It's a great question. It's actually the question I asked Joe when he proposed the topic to me, is that it would we be doing a Confederate side of things? And at this point in time, I can say no. And that is primarily because we are using images that we physically own. At this point, it's pretty much all Joe's collection, but I've also begun collecting myself. We physically own these images, and Confederate images are much, much rarer and thus much more expensive. Additionally, because we are using their official records and their service records, as you know, well, the Confederate records are much dicier. And there's huge holes in the Confederate records, and we may not be able to identify many of the CDVs that actually are out there.
Well, Matt, we wish you best of luck, and thank you for coming to Civil War Digital Digest. I'll be looking forward on my shelf later this summer to putting a third book right here.
Well, that's the hope.
Great. Well, for Civil War Digital Digest, books are always a great way for you to forge a connection with history. Thank you for spending time getting to know Matt with us. You're going to see him on a few episodes coming up because they only do certain things in these books, but we can take an even deeper dive here on Civil War Digital Digest for some of these characters. Join us again.